All right, well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining. I see there's still some people coming on, but we'll just keep admitting folks as they join. My name is Peter Bonnell. I am president-elect of AOBA, and I will avoid jokes on that topic. I'll be the moderator today for our discussion. I want to welcome all the AOBA members who are with us today. Members of the press, government officials. I understand there's a couple of council members joining us as well, which we really appreciate. I would also like to thank the staff of AOBA who put this presentation together. Peggy, Nicola, Randy, Eric, Brandy, who really helped out a lot with this. You know, I'm doing the talking, and as a lot of us have said in the past, we wouldn't be able to do all this talking if it wasn't for the staff. So I want to extend my thanks on behalf of all of us to them. We've got a couple of sponsors to thank for today's presentation. First, Porter Plus is the multifamily division of Clean Office, launched in 2016 to address the unique needs of apartment and condominium communities. Porter Plus Clean Office is a full-service property services company who provides everything from daily cleaning to special services such as carpet care and floor work. The company is now offering a variety of programs to protect our properties with the disinfecting programs. Principal Greg Buckner is a certified cleaning geek, self-certified, I think, and also holds the top industry designation of CBSE. He's passionate about cleaning and understands that creating a safe, clean work environment is essential to the success of any business. So thanks so much to Porter Plus Clean Office and Greg for supporting us today in this event. Next, special thanks to Oculus Realty, which provides award-winning advisory services to operators and developers of multifamily, retail, and mixed-use property. Oculus can be reached at oculusrealty.com. And finally, Derrick Associates. For 25 years, Derrick has been a trusted vendor partner to leading property management firms in Maryland, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. They specialize in energy efficient LED lighting solutions for the multifamily housing industry, and most recently have also begun to offer a wide range of PPE, personal protective equipment for its clients as well. We have a lot to cover today. First will be Will Rich with Delta Associates. He's going to discuss the results and the economic situation as of the end of the third quarter. We're going to keep everyone muted throughout the program. We'll have a panel discussion on the topics that Will talks about, and then some other items that are on everyone's mind. We're going to keep everyone muted through the program, but we ask now, Brandy's asked now, if everyone would enable their camera so we can do a picture for the website, for the newsletter. And also, while you're turning your video on, any questions you might have you'd like me to ask the panelists during the panel discussion, you can just drop them into your into the chat, and I'll see them here, and I'll incorporate those into our panel discussion. So if we're ready, Brandy's going to take a picture. Everybody look at your camera. 1, 2, 3. Okay, I think we're good. Will Rich is the president of Delta Associates, where he oversees all operations. Delta, as many of us know, provides services to the commercial real estate industry for over 40 years, consulting, research, advisory services, market feasibility, asset performance enhancement, market due diligence, white papers on special topics, valuation analysis, litigation support, and of course their subscription publications, which are fantastic, which many of us use every day. Will has been with Delta since 2002 and has extensive consulting experience across the real estate industry. He's of course a regular presenter at Trendlines, which I think most of us are familiar with. If you're not, it's a great program. Will is a counselor of real estate, member of the National Association of Realtors, ULI, serves on the board of the Washington, D.C. Economic Partnership, Southwest Community Center, and is also an advisor to the Southwest Bid. So with that, Will, I'll turn it over to you, and we'll take a look at the presentation. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Peter. Thank you to AOBA for having me this morning. I'm just going to go over briefly the data that we have from our Q3 Mid-Atlantic apartment market report, and then that will give plenty of time for questions and the panel discussion. So as I mentioned, this is from our Q3 report, and I just wanted to just start off by giving some context to the Washington area and then drill in more into what's been happening in the District of Columbia. So the Washington metro area is the 7th largest apartment market between Houston and South Florida, with about 560,000 apartment units. In terms of vacancy, during the third quarter, the Washington metro area for all classes of apartments was between New York and Phoenix, with a vacancy rate of 4.5%, which is slightly lower than the national average. However, once you get into the District of Columbia itself, you can see that the picture is quite different. So from the period of 2007 to 2020, you can see that the vacancy rate ranged from a low of 3% to a high of 6.1% in 2017. In the third quarter of 2020, vacancy in the District of Columbia reached 7.8%, which is the highest that we've ever seen for stabilized vacancy. Now, stabilized vacancy refers to apartment projects that are not in lease up. So these are just apartment buildings that have reached stabilization, which is typically 95% occupancy. So currently in the District of Columbia, the vacancy rate is above, much higher than it's ever been. And that compares to the end of 2019, when the vacancy rate in the city was just 4.8%. Here's a look at how the vacancy rate compares for all of the submarkets that we track within the city. So vacancy is lower in the downtown area, what we call Central DC, and that is just at about 6%. And then it ranges up to about 10% in the Capitol Hill Riverfront Southwest submarket, where a lot of new apartment development has been occurring. Where I mentioned before that the vacancy rate citywide was up over 300 basis points from a year ago, you could see that looking at each of the submarkets, it ranges from an increase of 200 basis points in Upper Northwest to a 660 basis point increase in Upper Georgia Avenue. Absorption in the city, as you can guess, is highest in the Capitol Hill Riverfront Southwest submarket, where I mentioned before, a lot of development has occurred in recent years. It's the only submarket in the city where absorption is over 1,000 units. There are a couple of submarkets in the city where absorption was actually negative over the past 12 months, which includes Upper Georgia Avenue and Northeast. Now, absorption throughout the city is down 33%, so it's down 1/3 from what it was the previous year. And that ranges again by submarket. Most submarkets, you saw a decrease in absorption ranging from 13% in the Capitol Hill Riverfront Southwest to a decrease of over 500% in Upper Georgia Avenue, where it turned negative over the past 12 months. Rent growth, metro-wide, was down at about 7%. Metro-wide rents were down. In the district, it was a much more drastic decrease, 10.7% decline in the city, which is the most that we've ever seen since we've been tracking the district market since the 90s. 10.7% decrease in the city. To compare what that is to the suburbs, in Northern Virginia, rents decreased by 7.2%. And in suburban Maryland, they decreased by just 2.6%. So the city has experienced a much more rapid decrease in rents over the past 12 months. By submarket, rents decreased decreased in all submarkets throughout the past 12 months. Upper Northwest rents decreased by about 3% or so, whereas in Central DC downtown, rents decreased by over 13%. You can see that the district average is negative 10.7. So some submarkets, the rent decline was not as severe, but in others, rents decreased in the double digits. Now here's a map showing where all of the new apartment development is occurring currently in the district. There are over 16,000 apartments that are currently either, there are unleased apartments that are either under construction or are in lease up. The green dots represent projects that are currently in lease up, and the blue dots represent ones that are yet to start leasing. You can see there's a large concentration of apartments that are currently in lease up in the Capitol Hill Riverfront Southwest submarket, which hugs the riverfronts of the Anacostia and the Washington Channel. You can also see there's a lot of projects that are under construction, not yet leasing in the Noma 8th Street submarket, which is to the northeast of the riverfront area. And the Shaw Columbia Heights submarket also has a lot of projects that are in lease up, which is on this map to the northwest of the Noma 8th Street submarket, which is shaded in the dark gray. Now, the amount of units that are projected to come online over the next 24 months is significant throughout the metro area, especially in the district. Just in the next 12 months, we are expecting about 7,000 units to deliver in the metro, in the District of Columbia. That compares to about 5,700 units that delivered in the most recent 12-month period. And another significant chunk of units are expected to come online from the period of the Q4 2021 to Q3 2022 period. So over 10,000 units are expected to come online in the District of Columbia in the next 2 years. It's a lot of units. Here's a breakdown of the development pipeline in the District of Columbia as of the third quarter. A good chunk of units are in the Capitol Hill Riverfront Southwest submarket with 40% of the total. Another 34% is in the Noma 8th Street submarket. Northeast is the only other submarket that has more than 10% of the total in that particular submarket. And the other areas of the cities have a significant amount of units, but not as much as what you're seeing currently in the Capitol Hill Riverfront Southwest and Noma 8th Street submarkets. So that totals over 17,800 units that are currently in a 36-month development pipeline, which includes projects that are still in lease up, as well as units that we expect to start construction and deliver over the next 36 months. So here are a few takeaways that we have based on what I've just presented. Stabilized vacancy in the city is at historic highs. We're seeing vacancy rise in the city and close in suburbs, while it's falling in other submarkets that are further away from the core of the region. For residents, there's less of a need to live closer to work now, as work from home is more common. Absorption is down 33% from the previous year, and we expect that this will remain below average in the city in 2021. Rent growth is projected to remain negative citywide through the end of the year and into 2021. While rents have decreased significantly in the city, in the outer suburbs, rents actually increased from a year ago. We're seeing vacancy rise in the city, rents fall, and with the amount of units that are projected to come online over the next 12 to 24 months, we don't expect conditions to improve much in the city moving forward. Which brings me to my fourth point: over 17,000 new apartment units are in the 36-month development pipeline, with almost 3/4 of those units located in just 2 submarkets. So that's what I've got to present for this morning, and I will turn it back over to Peter so he can moderate the discussion moving forward. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Will. A lot of great information there. Again, if you have questions that you'd like us to ask the panelists, who I'm going to introduce now, you can drop those into a chat, either the group chat, or if you want to send them to me privately, feel free to do that, and I'll make sure we get your questions asked. So I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, I'm going to go in order, and first is Tiffany.
Good morning. I'm Tiffany Butcher. I'm an Executive Vice President at JBG Smith, and I lead our residential and our retail asset and property management groups.
Thanks, Tiffany. John?
I'm John Ritz from WC Smith, president of the company. I lead our property management effort and been with the company 45 years.
Thanks, John. Tom? You're on mute.
Tom Borger, I'm chairman of Borger Management. We've managed an extensive number of units in DC, as well as own rent controlled properties in the city.
Thanks, Tom. Melissa?
Good morning. I'm Melissa Steele, the CEO of E&G Group.
Thanks, Melissa. David?
David Rydberg, CEO and president of Horning Brothers.
Thank you. And finally, Josh.
Josh Bernstein, CEO of Bernstein Management, and we've been owner-operators in DC for over 70 years.
Thanks very much, everybody. I'm going to ask a couple of questions. I'll ask panelists to jump in on them first. And then the idea is we'll just have a discussion about this, what people are seeing, and what we saw in Will's presentation. So obviously, the issue that's on all of our minds is vacancies, declining rents. We saw in Will's presentation, supply is going to continue to grow. You know, there's a lot of articles out there, not just about DC, but about, you know, New York and other metro areas, about folks leaving metro areas. That's borne out in Will's numbers with the you know, rent decreases in the metro area. I was reading an article. Zillow estimated in October 2020 that over the course of the lockdown, 2 million young people have moved home to live with their parents. So a lot of different things driving this. But Josh, would you give us your perspective on that, what you're seeing in your portfolio?
Sure. And the reason I referenced the 70 years of operating history in Washington is I think it's important to understand what's happening now in a historical context. So my father started in the rental housing business in the 1950s, and we've only seen 2 periods of time with downturns like this, and this is the worst of those 2 prior. Those 2 prior periods were the riots in 1968 forced a lot of exodus and outmigration out of the city that increased vacancies that took, you know, decades to recover from. Then you had the early 90s with advent of huge suburban development coinciding with the economic downturns and financial instability of the city, created a big vacancy problem that took a long period to recover from. And, you know, the city has enjoyed great growth from the you know, the turn of the century to the 50s. It started declining in the 60s, and we're just now eclipsing that downturn. So, you know, it's a fragile thing. Will's data is troubling, but I think it dramatically understates what's actually happening. He's talking about average vacancy for a quarter. Our vacancy has been dropping about 1%, our occupancy has been dropping about 1% a month since August. So we own rent controlled buildings in DC, market rate buildings in DC, and suburban. I can give you the data for those 3 categories. So in March, our vacancy was about 4%, 3.9% in our rent controlled inventory in DC, 4% in the DC market rate, and 3.2% vacancy in the suburbs. Today, it's close to 10% in DC, a little higher on the market, less on the rent control, but rent control is not immune. Market forces are larger than rent control here. Suburban vacancy is only 4.4%. So it's painting a very clear picture of an out-migration from the city. Big drivers, young professionals, students, that demand has disappeared. And we've seen rent declines of 15% in most markets. In the submarkets where we have heavy concentrations of students, we have vacancies over 20%.
Yeah, thanks for that, Josh. I live in DC, and you know, having lived through the last several months, you know, it was funny to wake up one morning and realize that all the things, all the reasons, many of the reasons that folks live in cities, movie theaters, gyms, socializing, bars, restaurants, all gone. And then you begin, you know, people begin to question why they're, you know, why they're living in a densely populated area. CNBC did an article in August of 2020 where they gave this a name. They called it the life satisfaction index, for lack of a better term, is dropping off the cliff in metro areas. Tiffany, would you like to add your perspective?
Sure, I'd love to give some additional color to what we're seeing, because I think we're seeing really three key trends. One of them, is Josh alluded to, is that we're seeing students and younger working professionals giving up their urban apartments, moving in with family, often in other locations, while universities are conducting classes 100% virtually, and employers continue to work in a work from home environment that's allowing a lot of jobs to be done remotely from anywhere. Likewise, at sort of the other end of the spectrum, we're seeing empty nesters who often rent some of the larger urban apartments and may have second homes in other locations, opt to stay in their second homes during the pandemic and hence giving up their urban apartments, because many of the key reasons that attracted them to urban living, you know, namely walkability to shops and restaurants, just isn't as attractive to them right now, as you were saying, Peter. We've also seen a number of renters, both urban and suburban, who at the end of their lease term are moving to purchase homes. And these are renters that probably would have purchased homes anyhow over the next few years. But the impact of the pandemic, coupled with the low interest rate environment, has really accelerated them making that lifestyle choice and you know, deciding to purchase homes now. I think one of the things to think about is that hopefully these trends will reverse, but it's going to take employers bringing people back to the office environment to create a need to come back in the city. It's going to take universities being able to once again resume on-campus classes for the student demographic to come back. And again, to have a vaccine and to have an urban environment that is, you know, attractive and offers all of the things that make our city such a great place to live.
Thank you. But it's a really good point about folks coming back to work, because I've been here since the early 2000s, and the way that downtown looked in the early 2000s, the late 90s, early 2000s, whenever I'm down there, I'm having flashbacks of that, and you know that doesn't come back overnight. So it's really it's not just about rental housing. It's a concern about, you know, the fabric of the urban environment. Mm-hmm. Kind of getting back to the nitty gritty of the issue here, and kind of the problem that there doesn't seem to be a solution for, you know, as this drags out, is you know, the issue of folks who are unable to pay the rent or unable to get access to subsidies. And you know, many of us have a growing accounts receivable that there will have to be, you know, some sort of you know, resolution on. John Ritz, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, if you would.
Sure, Peter. Again, we have a little bit of a unique perspective. We manage about 10,000 units in the district. About 30% of those are strictly affordable by covenant. Another 50% or so are governed by rent control. And about 20% are pure market, new construction built within the last 5 years. So I concur with many of the comments that have been made, but there are very different experiences that people are having, where in the more affluent areas, people are making decisions to move home or to purchase homes or do other things of that nature, driving vacancy up, have made the decisions not to live in the urban environment. In the more affordable communities, and maybe concentrated in wards 5, 7, 8, they're not making those housing choices. They don't have them to make. What they're suffering from is severe economic impact on their households. Our accounts receivable just in the month of October grew by $1 million. So the amount of outstanding rent has grown dramatically as the stimulus money expired earlier in the pandemic, which was a tremendous help to these people in working class households who often had 2 jobs and have lost one of them, or had hours have been cut back, service industry jobs that have been affected. They are in dire straits. And this is only going to worsen. Nothing's going to be solved in the next 2 or 3 or 4 months. We're probably mid-2021 before we see some normalcy. Our concern is, how do we unwind this? I mean, we've worked diligently with households for deferred payments. We've worked with the ERAP and CHAP programs directly, devoting resources from people who are otherwise involved in collections, and have been relatively successful to get people assistance. But even that's limited. It's only about 4 months of assistance, and this pandemic is a 12-month experience easily. So that's revenue that we need to operate the properties. That's what pays payroll. That's what pays insurance, taxes, keeps the utilities going. So it's a different strain. The strain is not so much from the vacancy side, which reduces revenue, but in communities where the revenue and the profit margin was very thin to begin with, and the struggle of these households to work through the pandemic are having tremendous economic impact on these properties. And we're concerned, terribly concerned, how are we going to work with these folks? We don't want to have serious eviction problems. We want people to maintain their households. And we need some help. We're going to need to partner with the city and come up with a strategy as well as the resources to try to bridge that gap. It's a serious problem that we're facing.
No doubt. Is anyone else? I know a lot of us are helping residents who are in need get access to the dollars that are out there, that what is available. Does anyone want to share their experience with that?
I can just share that we have had some success when we have been having staff dedicated to working directly with households who are struggling, like John mentioned. So, there are funds available, but it is not an easy process to navigate, and there were a lot of misconceptions about access to those resources. So it's something that we've had to work on a community by community basis to really try to overcome some of that and provide resources for our community. So we have seen some of that working, but same type of challenges that John was mentioning across the board, and we're concerned with what's going to happen next, obviously.
Peter, I'd like to make a comment about the emergency rent assistance. In Maryland and Virginia, the landlord can take the initiative to secure emergency rental assistance. In DC, the tenant has to, and it's been challenging for some of the residents to go through the bureaucracy and get the emergency assistance that's there. Now, among our group talking before this conference, I think most of us agreed that we had to be much more proactive and actually have our own staff assist residents. But it's been it's unfortunately, the money's sitting out there and it's not getting into the hands of the residents. I think that's a really important. I also was a comment about the payment plan situation. We've found in our buildings that are downtown, which are mainly occupied by millennials, et cetera, there's not much of an interest in going into a payment plan if you don't know whether you're going to have a job in 6 months. So in lieu of entering into an agreement, they would just as soon opt to leave. And so in our experience, our delinquencies or our accounts receivable in the downtown buildings is significantly less than one would have assumed, whereas the vacancy in Columbia Heights, 16th Street, et cetera, down to DuPont Circle is 15 to 20%. And I think where the accounts receivable are less, the vacancy is higher because people just simply opted to move.
So I just wanted to add a little. One, I think, unintended consequence of the eviction moratorium was that there is less of an interest in the payment plans because people don't feel an urgency. They're waiting for that. And that also goes for the ERAP dollars. When we talk to people, they're like, well, I can't be evicted right now. I'll wait and see what happens when it ends. When it would be better if people were utilizing those funds now. But I think it's an unintended consequence of the eviction moratorium. People aren't looking at those longer term challenges of trying to use a payment plan or access other resources yet.
Peter, I'd like to, John touched on something. I think it's really important. We're talking about a lot of facts and figures here, but the truth is, the impacts of this pandemic are, huge impacts on individuals and families that are really struggling. And as landlords, this is not a zero-sum game. We care about our residents. We want to keep them in place to the extent possible. We want to, keep the city successful. So, some of the things we've done, we've forgiven $1 million, forgiven and deferred, which I think ultimately will be forgiven $1 million in rent with residents. And in addition, we have residents who not only couldn't pay their rent, but had issues being able to afford food. So we actually created with the Bernstein Management Company, our ownership entity, and a family foundation to create $1 million emergency support fund where residents could apply for basic needs. So we are all in this together. The city's facing challenges, individuals, residents are facing challenges, and businesses, including landlords, are severely challenged. And we've got to figure out a way to navigate through this together to try to keep people in place. And a lot of the language is sort of demonizing landlords is, just forgive the rent. It's easy to do that. Obviously, it's that is not so easy to do, and we are doing it when we can.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about the the practical impact, and Josh, that's a really good point about the I think the oversimplification of the issues that we're dealing with now, and every one of us, I know the folks on the panel and folks who are listening, listening in today, I hear stories every day of people working with individual residents. We've got, I probably should have thanked all of the, property management staff who've been working through this pandemic, because they're essential. And many of them are helping their residents who they have relationships with, working them on the payment program stuff or helping them, get assistance. That's a huge part of what's going on. And it's not just residential. We here at UIP also have commercial tenants, retail tenants. Some of them have been closed and remain closed. And we're working with each one of them on a personal level because we, as I mentioned earlier, that this pandemic is a threat to the urban fabric, and our small retailers and small commercial establishments are part of that urban fabric, and so we're working to try to keep them, in a position where they can get back on their feet once things start. But I want to dive in a little bit to the practical effect of big AR, lost revenue, uncertainty about when that's going to be paid, and that is. For those who don't know, mortgages on multifamily or mixed-use properties are 3, 5, 7 years, sometimes 10. These are not 30-year mortgages, and so debt maturities continue, to roll. There's different, debt service, programs out there where, for alleviation of debt service, but I don't know of any extensions on maturities, or not very many. And a lot of people say, well, interest rates are so low, it's very easy to refinance right now. But Tom, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what you're seeing. I know you've done a couple of refinances lately, as have we. What you're seeing in the debt market and how this is all affecting that.
Well, the debt market reads the newspapers too, and a lot of them are based in New York City, where they're petrified of the market and what's happening. So what I just closed a loan last week, 50% loan to value, seasoned property, just a refi. Yeah, the interest rate was low, but I had to put 12 months worth of interest and principal in an escrow. And the bank basically takes that out every month. This is the third loan we've closed since the pandemic started. And we started out with 6 months and now they're going to 12 months. They've also underwriting at in excess of 10% vacancy and collection loss, which lowers the loan to value. And I also know anecdotally from some major institutional investors who are joint venturing with developers that many of them are looking to exit. They want to exit this Washington, D.C. proper. Partially, they're concerned about the TOPA restrictions, whether the people realize it or not, but all the TOPA deals have been in limbo for now almost a year. And so it's very difficult to sell a property. And you couple that with declining rents and worried about occupancy, I think you'll see a continued exodus of institutional money. They'll take their profits from prior deals and move on. But overall, it's a much more conservative underwriting market.
We've been seeing the same thing. It's 12 months of interest reserves, and it really can have a big impact on the way each a sole building works. There's one question here I wanted to kind of throw out, which I think goes to what we're talking about here, not just TOPA, but rent control, changes in the regulatory structure, issues of business predictability that those changes or suggested changes bring up. But someone asked, with interest rates so low, does anyone feel there'd be an increase in apartment to condo conversions? And asked, are lenders or regulators resistant to conversions? Does anyone want to talk about that? I think in particular the question of what happens, if an apartment building becomes difficult to manage, it's hard to keep it up. What's the effect of that on the supply of rental housing?
Peter, my only comment would be, that's a regulated decision. So there has to be an election of the residents to choose that. And I think their economic uncertainty of their households would make it unlikely that they want to take on that obligation. It's not as simple as it sounds. You don't convert a rental building to a condominium or cooperative building easily. It's a long, protracted process. And again, there's so much uncertainty by everyone. I mean, we're reflecting it in our businesses. Lenders are reflecting it. Every month we have to report on accounts receivable and vacancy levels because they're concerned about the direction of the market. And individual households are just as uncertain. It's unlikely that you would have a collective decision made in a building of any size that would even consider conversion in this environment. I just don't even think it's a possibility.
Sure.
I'll just add to that briefly. So of the units that are currently under construction, the vast majority of them are larger buildings. So they're 200, 250 unit buildings. And a building of that size, lender is going to be resistant to allow for the developer to switch that building from an apartment to a condo.
Thanks for that, Will, John. A lot of us have talked about, the fact or there's been a lot of talk in the press about the eviction moratoria, various eviction moratoria that are out there, local, federal, kind of a patchwork of stuff going on. I think everybody agrees, that having, preventing mass evictions is probably something that we should be talking about, something that the government should be doing with appropriate thought and funding, which I'm not sure is there yet. But one of the things that I've heard a lot of people talking about is the fact that the eviction moratoria are blanket. It's not just for an inability to pay. Doesn't matter what the reason is. There are no evictions right now, and I know everybody's got a story. And we've been talking to the mayor's office and the city council about adjusting this, but everybody's got a story about a situation where there's an unsafe situation, or you know, at worst, you know, threat to health and safety, that the you know, multifamily owners and managers' hands are tied because of the moratoria. So, David, I know you've had a couple of those instances. You want to jump in?
Yeah, unfortunately, we've had one just this past week. It was a resident who twice has, you know, once punched one of our employees, threatened residents with a gun. Normally, we would have been able to evict. We weren't. Then they came back, and the second time they pulled a knife. And only now, because of working with some DC agencies, because he has a voucher, are we able to remove him. But I have residents living in fear, you know, of this individual. I couldn't do anything about it. Another property, I had a writ of eviction against somebody who had been dealing drugs and had been arrested multiple times and continues to do it, but I'm unable to take any action on it. And we get emails from residents saying, what can we do? And we're trying to do all we can, but our hands are tied. And I've even encouraged some of the residents to call city council. And when they call, a number of the council members' offices say, no, it only applies to monetary. So people, even in council, I don't think fully understand the consequences. It's a public safety issue for the residents, for the employees, and for the community.
Thanks, David.
I'd like to comment. One of the byproducts of that has been increased security costs. We have numerous large buildings in which we have several tenants that by any other normal times would have been evicted for threatening their neighbors. Since we can't evict them, and to protect their neighbors, we end up having security guards. We have security guards in some buildings 24/7 patrolling particular apartment units just to make the other residents on those corridors feel comfortable to continue living in the building. We also get questions fired at us about why this is happening. So like David referred to, we sent out mailings to residents explaining to the eviction moratorium and the fact that our hands are tied and we can't move people out. And I think most of our residents are just incredulous that this situation is there and that they're threatened as a result of that.
Anyone else want to speak about that? Certainly a serious issue. We have a building of 300 folks and one person's causing an issue and there's nothing we can do.
Yeah, I would just echo the remarks you already heard. We've had similar circumstances like Tom suggested, where we've had to station security on a floor near an apartment for a tenant who is threatening, physically threatening, has been taken away by the police, not held, released, and is back in the community in 48 hours. Even if they've had, evaluations for other issues, mental health issues, they're released. And while David suggested that he was able to get assistance through agencies, they can't remove someone. They can negotiate with them, they can try to work with them, but there's no legal way to remove that person. And even no matter how much of a threat they're causing to the community because of this moratorium. And, I think it's, again, an unanticipated byproduct of what was understood at the time to be protective of people because of the economic conditions, not of the social and personal issues that are taking place.
Definitely a serious issue and one that I know the staff are working on, talking to folks in government every day. We talked a little bit about what people are doing, what managers are doing to help residents. And Josh, David, Melissa mentioned a couple things, but but before we move on, does anyone else want to talk about programs they may have or creative ideas for, you know, for helping folks through this, or strategies for, you know, keeping folks in their homes, which is really what we're talking about here.
I'll just share.
I'll just go ahead, Melissa.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to share that we actually had a kind of a working focus group of our staff members who were working with residents at the site level to give us input about what they thought would be most impactful in our communities. And out of those focus groups came having weekly food delivery. We partnered with the Capital Area Food Bank and were able to utilize some of our parking lots to do food distribution and handle some things differently. But we also had put together a group of a stress management program for our staff. And that is actually something that we're extending to our communities, because, you know, as we're all talking about the challenges that people are facing when they're trying to make decisions about, you know, their housing and how to provide food for their families, the stress and, you know, the mental health impact right now is really significant and important that we are addressing and working through that. So we've had really good feedback. People are finding it helpful. We, you know, it is something that's a little bit different than we would normally think about in property management, that we're trying to create other solutions, but just trying to do anything to help, you know, address some of these challenges. And unfortunately, you know, we have seen increases of crime in our communities as well. And we do think that some of these things, you know, do go together, unfortunately.
Yeah, I was just going to add, you know, with our affiliation with the ARC in Southeast Washington, we've utilized that to feed almost 200 families a week in some of our partnerships with similar organizations, Capital Area Food Bank, DC Central Kitchen, Martha's Table, and others. But maybe in a more subtle way, what we've tried to work with our managers is to develop in-building partnerships with residents. We call it COVID companions. You know, the early stages of this were very unsettling for people in multifamily buildings. They had to move in elevators. They had to go into laundry rooms. They had to go into areas where there was hard to maintain social distancing, and some were contracting the virus. So we developed a partnership that was implemented on our site level managers, where they partnered with one another. Tenants would help each other. If they were quarantined, they buy food, they deliver things. We delivered packages to doors. We tried to minimize person-to-person contact. So, you know, I think it's a broad spectrum. You know, everything from what Josh has done through his family foundation and business. We've all partnered with nonprofits, but it's even gotten down to the property level and the subtle personal things that have been done. And I'm sure we all have similar anecdotes where we've really engaged, and our people are on the front line. We were designated essential businesses from day one. We didn't have the luxury of working from home. We had to open up rental offices. We had to do maintenance work. We had to take care of repairs. We didn't have that luxury to just say, I'm going to sit at home and work in my pajamas, you know, maybe with a dress shirt on when I had to get on a Zoom call. We had to get up and go to work every day. And so I think, you know, I'd like to champion all of those more subtle efforts that maybe aren't spoken about as much, but I think really contributed. And we've gotten tremendous feedback from residents. We developed a communication committee from the very first day, and we were sending out weekly communication to our residents. It helped them deal with living in a multifamily environment. And it's developed. I think now we all understand the virus more than we did in March and April. And so, you know, I think we can speak to the more constructive as well as the more subtle contributions we've made to try to help our residents. They're our customers. Frankly, they're our friends in many cases. And we try to work with them just in that context.
John, I just want to add on to that and say, I totally agree with you. Our on-site team members are truly the unsung heroes who are coming to work every day. They're providing outstanding customer service. They're forming those relationships with our customers and really trying to understand the unique needs of each of our customers and connecting them with resources. You know, like you, one of the things we did very early on was develop for each individual community within our portfolio, a list of nonprofit resources that are serving that community that we could connect people with. So whether that be connecting them with food resources or educational resources or whatever it is that they need, and particularly with any kind of rental assistance programs that different nonprofits may be offering. And so, that is something that I think has been very helpful, is to have our on-site team members, have those resources available that they can connect people with. And then obviously at the corporate level, we've also been, working with those nonprofits and helping to support them as well. And I think that that on-site team member, though, I think you're exactly right. It's that personal connection and understanding what residents need and coming alongside and helping them is really important.
Yeah,
I think it's only safe to also comment that the stress level on our staff on site over the last 6 months has been excruciating. Anybody here that's in the management staff, management business, knows that the individuals that we have out there, whether they're maintenance men or community managers, they have really been under tremendous stress, worrying about their own families, their own children, protecting themselves while still doing the job that they need to do. So it's been an amazing effort, I think, at all of our companies.
Yeah, and I think we put together right from the beginning that one of the core values in working through this was compassion, and compassion for each other, employees, compassion for the residents and the community. And we really, while some places are cutting back because, as you've heard of some of the challenges, we wanted to ensure that our resident engagement increased, that we continue engaging. We all know mental health issues are out there, for our employees and then residents at some of our properties. We added some teledoc services during the challenges of COVID, and a number of the other activities that you've heard, food distribution, laptops for children in school. But I think the compassion and resident engagement and the stress that residents and employees both feel, that it's a tough time and people have to be sensitive to one another.
Just one more comment.
Sure.
In a typical building of 300 apartments, 75% of the people weren't there during the day. They were at work or they were at school. Today, in a 300-unit apartment building, got 600 people there on top of each other, in the laundry rooms, in the elevators. And the tension in and of itself from just that many people being home all day is compounded the problem. So if one person, you never knew your neighbor played their music really loud because you were at work, but you sure know now because you're home all day. And this just has magnified the issues on the sites.
It's not just that, Tom, but the expenses have gone up as well. Certainly in our portfolio, there's, a lot of people are home all day, maybe taking 2 showers when they used to shower at the gym. We've been looking at water bills, since it started, and depending on the building, their water bills are up 10 to 25%, and that's usage. That's not leaks. So there's a lot of different aspects to this. I really appreciate hearing from everyone on the practical things that everybody's doing. And David, your core value in dealing with this being compassion. I think it's worth highlighting. I saw one question here that I was hoping I could pose to Will, and that is, do we know what's happening with the district's population? I know we just had a census, and I don't know when we hear about that, but have there been any studies, Will, or information yet about the district's population has been so closely watched for so many years as it's been growing? Do we have any idea where we are today?
As you mentioned, the census is still being tabulated, so we'll see how that has changed, but that's a 10-year look. But I've seen some anecdotal evidence through the media that there has been a decrease in population in DC over the past several months as people have gone home to live with their parents, or have just gone to other parts of the metro area to hold, to stay there until the pandemic has ended. I can see with the vacancy rates in DC being at 7.8%, whereas in the suburbs, the vacancy changes have been nominal. In suburban Maryland, for example, the vacancy rate there increased 10 basis points from a year ago. So in Northern Virginia, there's about a 80 basis point change, but in DC, over 300 basis points. So that that there tells you that people are moving out of the district and they're moving either to suburban Maryland, Northern Virginia, or they're moving back home to upstate New York or Massachusetts or California or wherever they have come from. So there is some evidence that there has been people leaving the city, but I don't have a statistic saying 10,000 people have left the city over the past 6 months.
Certainly something we'll all be paying very close attention to. I also wanted to highlight what Will said in the chat over here, and that in response to a question, and that is that our absorption, new units rented in the city has been about 4,500 per year, and that was when we were in a good economy. Will says we have 10,000 units expected to deliver over the next 24 months, which would outpace absorption in a good economy. And we have, the combined issue of probably too much supply and falling demand, which is going to be a problem that the industry is dealing with for many years. I wanted to turn quickly to a comment that Councilmember Alyssa Silverman made in the chat here. She mentioned that John was talking about the unemployment benefit. The $600 was very helpful to getting the rent paid. And this kind of goes to something I wanted to talk about a little bit later, which is our engagement on an individual level. Councilmember Silverman's encouraged us to testify at hearings about how unemployment insurance, unemployment compensation is used. I think at this point we're expecting another stimulus. I think the amount and the timing is probably all that's left, to debate. But Councilmember Silverman, suggests that we talk about tying eligibility for those benefits to rent subsidy when the stimulus comes in. And I wondered if anybody had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can start. I think it's a great question. I mean, when the eviction moratorium is done, we're going to have, unfortunately, thousands of residents in our city that owe, as you've heard already, tens of millions of dollars in back rent, and no one wants evictions. Absolutely nobody. And the best options is a stimulus bill. We've heard, to the extent that the unemployment benefit can be part of rent support, but rent support is key. In the end, we all hope it'll be enough money in rent support, but likely government and landlords and philanthropy and residents are all going to have to work together on this issue. I think there can be solutions, but it's going to need to be people working together, not just at a hearing, but just, in other forums as well, because it is going to be a partnership to make this work. And that is what, everybody is hoping for. As I said, nobody wants, evictions.
Another important thing to keep in mind, Peter, you touched on it, that, this is going to go on for years. I think, there may be a misunderstanding that once there's a vaccine rolled out, that somehow the DC rental housing market is going to recover immediately. It is not likely to do so. I believe this is going to be a challenging environment for years.
No doubt, this is something that we're going to see, whether it's high vacancy in residential or big turnover. We're already seeing restaurants close permanently. I think every week there's an announcement, and this I may be dating myself a little bit, but I came to DC when it was when folks were starting to move back into the city, in the early 2000s. Or more folks were starting to move back into the city. Not that there was, there wasn't a big population here then, but the change that was really came to bear in 2008, 2009, when DC had a lot of jobs, when the rest of the country didn't, in the downturn, and so many young people moved to DC, and so many restaurants opened as a result of that. And I'm worried about what happens, and how long it takes us to get back from that. And I'd urge the government officials and council members who are listening to think about that. Think about the long-term effects as we all, you know, juggle multiple priorities as we try to deal with this and get through it.
Well, I would just add, if I could, I want to thank Councilmember Silverman for her comments, and I agree. But more importantly, we need to start that dialogue now. What are we going to do? How are we going to help these families, many of them who are workforce housing families who have been impacted to a much greater extent? I mean, even the young person who's moving home, they probably still have a job. They're still working remotely. And so we need a strategy. We need to start talking about it now. We may not have the dollars ready when it's time to need them, but we better have a plan. And I'd love to be a part of that conversation. I'm sure there's many people on this meeting and others who would like to participate. And we appreciate Councilmember Silverman bringing it up, and hopefully we can work with her and others on the council.
John, I'd like to point out that the hospitality industry, in the broadest sense, according to Jeff DeWitt, accounts for 45% or so, don't quote me on the exact percent, of sales tax in the city. Well, there is no hospitality industry. There is no restaurant industry. Right now, according to them, there is not a convention booked in DC for 2021. If you look out further, just like you're saying, we could be having the same conversation very easily this time next year or the year after. If without the hospitality industry coming back, we're not going to get the job growth we need for many of our residents. And I don't think that's going to happen next year. And so I really believe that we're looking at a multiple year problem in our particular market. So just echoing what you said about starting now to figure out a plan.
Absolutely, and I'll just jump in and echo that too. It definitely is going to have to be, you know, a public and private partnership, because for an individual family that, you know, by the end of this might not have paid rent for a year or 2 years, given how much, even once they find a job, given how much of their income goes to rent to live in the city, they're not going to be able to pay back, you know, 2 years of back rent. So it's going to have to be a public partner, you know, private partnership, working together and working with the resident to figure out the ultimate solution for that, to help them get back on their feet. And I would love to be part of that conversation as well.
I think a lot of good ideas, and sometimes it's hard to focus on this stuff, but this is great to hear from everybody about our you know, willingness to participate. And this is none of I think it's safe to say none of us have dealt with a pandemic before, and so this is, you know, this is something that we're going to have to feel our way through and you know, figure out each challenge as we have over the last 9 months. I wanted to invite the audience, anybody else has a question, to go ahead and enter it in the group chat, and I'll pose it to the panelists. Are there any, well, before we get to that, I think, we've talked about this a little bit, but John, do you want to talk a little bit about what your specific concerns are, what keeps you up at night, you know, as we as you operate a rental portfolio in DC?
Well, I think the first thing that keeps me up at night is our staff. You know, I'm trying to keep them safe. We've been very fortunate, took a lot of proactive measures, but they're exposed, you know, on many levels to a wide population of people, and it clearly is something we work on every day. But in terms of overall economic problems, I think it's the one we just spoke of, and that's the growing delinquency balances, the accounts receivable balances, and how are these households, as Tiffany well described, going to unravel themselves from this debt? I mean, it's no more than a home foreclosure where they're owing the lender, you know, multiple months because they can't pay the mortgage. We don't want the apartment back. We want them to be able to maintain their homes and their families, but how do we do it? And I think, again, as Tiffany said, a public-private partnership, there's going to have to be a lot of elements here to maintain that, to make sure that we're working with people. it's going to take a lot of effort by the city, not just dollars. You know, the ERAP and CHAP programs, you know, we've all heard comments, and we've had, I can give you plenty of our personal experiences. The administration of it is not adequately funded. So people can't get access to funds. Not that the funds aren't available. The city council's made funds available. They can't access them. So that's why the discussion is not just how to solve it, but what is going to be the vehicle and the mechanism for people to reach out, be managed, and be assisted so that we can get back to healthier communities and ones that aren't under this kind of financial and economic stress.
Thanks, John.
We have some properties outside of DC, and for example, one in a further out county has already been where the eviction moratorium has lifted, other than the CDC one, but we've had a lot of success working with residents who are also getting support from philanthropy. The county government is stepping up, some philanthropy is stepping up, and we're stepping up. But, you know, I think as we've talked about public-private, it's broad, it's government, the landlord, philanthropy, but at that property, philanthropy is really stepping up to help as well.
Thanks, David. We've had a couple questions pop up. Does anybody have thoughts on the change in administration come January? I know in my experience, we usually see an uptick in leasing, and I think we're looking forward to that as, you know, new folks come to the city with a new presidential administration. Any thoughts on that?
Let's hope they give DC the funding they deserve and need.
Yeah, stimulus bill is critical, and it was great news on Pfizer the other day, potentially. But the one downside of it was there were people coming out right away saying, oh, now there's need for less of a stimulus. That is not the case. So hopefully the DC will get its fair share, which it did not last time, and the stimulus bill will be large enough.
Does anybody, another question that just came in, we talked a little bit about this, but it probably does bear repeating a little bit. Does anybody want to touch on size of concessions, rent reduction, short-term leases, and strategies in dealing with vacancy? Nobody wants to talk about concessions.
Yeah, we do all of the above.
Yeah.
We do rent concessions, rent reductions, short-term leases. What you can get a warm body into your office. If you can get somebody to come to the property and take a virtual tour, you do what you have to do to rent the apartment. And as everybody here knows, they walk in the door, or they walk in theoretically on the computer and say, what's your COVID deal for this week? You know, and they have shopped the market. They have gone online and looked at every comparable property, and it's like going to a used car lot. They're just going to go and negotiate to get the best deal. So, and what ends up happening, as we all know, is you give away more than you ever hoped, you know, or thought you were going to have to give away, but you need someone living in the building. So there's nothing magic about it.
There's also been a diametric change in what is an attractive apartment. And I know I heard others say it earlier, but smaller units are far less attractive because people are spending so much more time in their apartment homes. Used to be they'd work 10 hours a day, meet friends at a bar, go to a museum on the weekend. They do none of that now. So I think we're all finding the biggest challenge are very small units, smaller one-bedrooms, studios, et cetera. That's not going to change if people are working from home. I don't care what special you can give, the smaller unit is more challenged. And yet, not only were many of the older buildings, the rent control buildings, built with smaller units in the 60s and early 70s, but that's where the inventory is. And there's not the right match between the inventory that's available and the demand. People want larger units, more space. They're working from home, especially, you know, more and more we found that young professionals had children in their apartments. I mean, Tom and I and Josh, we all remember not too many years ago where there were very few children living in our apartments. But the DC public schools have improved so greatly that people see it as an advantage to be in Murch or Eaton or Leland or Hearst or Lafayette, and they want to use those schools. So we now have children in apartments, and that makes that space even tighter. So we just have a mismatch right now. And until that rebalances, which could take quite a while, as often has been said, I don't think any concession is going to solve that problem.
We've seen the largest rent reduction in the studio apartments percentage-wise and the highest vacancy. And I know anecdotally that the micro units across the city are probably well in excess of 20% vacant, maybe heading toward 30%.
I think that's the bottom line, is the inventory of housing. There's not enough demand to fill the current inventory of rental housing in DC for the reasons we've all discussed. And that is not going to snap back. It's going to take a long time. So when you look at the vacancy numbers and rent drops that have been projected, I think look for that to continue to not just continue, but to accelerate. You know, this is musical chairs. We're all competing for the inadequate tenant group to fill our buildings. We're not going to fill our buildings, and we're just going to, it's a race to the bottom on rents and concessions. You know, the proposed rent control legislation in this environment is just particularly astonishing. You know, this is an example of market forces completely overwhelm rent control. And with the current proposals, landlords have this, Pyrrhic decision. Do you want to take a 20% rent drop on a unit, recognizing that rent may be frozen in time now, long term, which would take 10 or 15 years to get back to the rent we were getting for that unit a year ago. I mean, I certainly hope that's going to it's like the beatings will continue until morale improves strategy.
That's a really good point, Josh. As everyone knows, there's a slate of rent control bills, before the council this week. This situation has highlighted for us and for anyone who's watching. I hope that the reason that concessions are used is when the bottom falls out of the market, and lenders and investors, underwrite real estate, invest in real estate, help us improve our aging rental housing stock by investing in that. And those projections include the burn off of concessions as economic conditions improve. But to lock in COVID rates for the future, it could have a real impact on the viability of older rent controlled housing.
Not to mention the value of those properties and the reduced tax revenues for the city. I mean, it's just this downward spiral that we saw in the 90s. It took us a long time to recover from. I really hope we don't go back to those dark days.
Well, I think there's a lot of interest in everybody talking, city council members and these groups. I want to reiterate to everybody, AOBA members and other non-AOBA members who are involved in the housing industry, the multifamily industry, the mixed-use buildings, to make your voice heard. It never hurts to call your council member, to email your council member, to call the mayor's office, to email the mayor's office. Let them know what's going on. I know we have. I'm not sure how many participants we're up to today. Maybe Brandy can let me know. It's a lot of people, and it indicates that there's a real concern about this. We've heard from a lot of folks today who are providing housing in DC and working very hard to do that in a very difficult environment. And we didn't really touch on it a lot, but we talk about rent controlled housing. Rent controlled housing in DC is necessarily at least older than 1980. A lot of it is pre-war, 1930s, 1940s, 1950s. Requires a lot of investment, and the impact of COVID is really compounding the challenges that rental housing stock is facing. Brandy said we have close to 80 participants, so I want to thank everyone for joining today. especially want to thank our panelists. There's a lot of knowledge and experience assembled in this group. I want to thank Will for his data, and we'll all be keeping a close eye on that. The AOBA staff, thanks very much for putting this together, for all the work that you do every day. And finally, you know, I want to extend thanks, and please extend thanks to those that aren't on the call, everybody who's working in our industry right now, the leasing folks, the maintenance folks, the property managers, people who are not, you know, working from home, you know, coming in every day and helping residents, you know, apply for assistance and deal with issues. You know, they are really the heroes of the industry. So thanks everyone for a terrific event. Have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.